All right, so here we have the beginning of a website that is going to allow us to dynamically generate other websites. Eventually, this will allow us to drag and drop and edit the content dynamically. Right now, it is dynamic in the sense that we do have some content based on some data that it currently lives on the browser that we've downloaded from the server, but after that first download, we're never going back to the server for anything, right? Other than perhaps some snippets of HTML that we dynamically render on the page, but any modifications we make go away after we reload the page, right? Everything is reset. The JavaScript is reloaded from the server, and we're never storing anything anywhere permanently. Okay, we need to make these changes permanent. Right? So that's what the next focus for the next week or so is going to be, right? Is to add the server in the life cycle of the data. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is to go back to the server, communicate to the server any changes, any stage changes that occur in the application. Right now, it is the browser who's maintaining the state of the application, right? And we saw that that is fairly brittle, right? The browser resets the state every time we reload the page, right? Any variables that we had stored, any arrays, they're all gone, right? The session is reset, and any RAM that was associated with the previous session is reloaded. So we need to we need to add the capability of being able to make those changes permanent. And the only way to do that is to go back to the server for that. All right. So let's do that. What we need to do, right, is to refactor our application so that instead of using a logic that only relies on data on the browser, to reuse data that lives on the server. Right now, for instance, we have the login relying on a service, right, on a user service that is retrieving the data from a local function that lives in a file that is also on the browser, right? So we have it on a service, user service, right? Is using this array of data here that we can register and add new users. We can delete a user. We can update a user. But it's all happening on the browser, right? If you refresh the page, the array is reloaded and it goes back to these four users. Okay, it's gone. So we need to make it permanent. So how do we do that? Well, we need to move this array somehow to the server side, and any data that we retrieve it has to be from the server. Instead, it can't live here, right? Because again, it's very temporary, right? The browser will only give us a snippet, a small snippet of the data set, right? It only has a partial view of the world, of the real data that is for the application. And it's stale at best, right? The real data always going to live on the server and eventually on the database. Okay, so let's start moving some of this data back where it belongs. So to do that, we're going to need to move this data back in the server. But then once we move it on the server, we need to decide on how is it that the browser is going to ever get this data, right, from the server. We need to determine how to do that. So to be able to start implementing things on the server, we're going to create a directory here where we're going to put the server side of this application. Right now we'll only be focusing on the client side of the application. We haven't talked about the server side. Well, I'm going to put because we're working on the assignment, I'm going to put it under a directory called assignment, and I'm going to do all my work under this directory, right, for the assignments. Okay, just like we have for the client side, We have an assignment directory under the public directory. It's under the public directory because it's meant for the browser to come in here and download all this stuff, right? The server-side code, I'm going to put it outside of the public directory because I don't mean for the browser to look at this, right? The code that we're going to be writing is going to execute exclusively on the server side. Yes? Also, just like we have an app.js, it's a JavaScript that kicks off the client-side application that runs on the browser. There's going to be an equivalent app.js that executes on the server. There's going to be an app.js on the server. So this is code that is going to execute on the desktop, okay, not on the browser. And right now they happen to be running on the same machine, right? But typically they would be running on separate machines, right? The browser is going to be running on somebody else's machine, and our server is going to be running on Heroku, right? So typically these are going to be two entirely different processes, different CPUs, different RAM, different everything. Yes? Okay. So this is going to be running on Heroku, whereas this app is going to be running on our client's machine. Yes? They downloaded it and it's running on their browser. We can't control their browser, right? We don't know what browser they're using, right? We know the server that we're running, right? We have a lot of control over what we do here. We have less control over the vendor's machine. Okay? So here we have access to the file system. We have access to the database. We have unfeathered access to the network. We can connect to anybody. Whereas this app.js has restricted, right? It's restricted because it runs on their browser. It's whatever their browser allows our app.js to do. Certainly, it's not going to be allowed to read their file system. It's not going to be allowed to ubiquitously connect to anybody in the network, right? They don't have a database. They don't have anything. If they need data, they're going to have to come back to us, to this app.js. All right? If they need to access the database, they're going to have to come back to us here in the server. Make sense? All right. So this is going to be our entry points to our server-side application. So for now, let's see if we can load this app.js. Right? Let's just say console log hello from the server-side application. Okay. So this is going to run on our desktop, not on the browser. So we're going to load this app.js. We're going to load it from our server. The server.js represents the running instance of our server, and is going to be responsible to kick off anything that loads on the server. Right? Notice that it runs the server-side test application for a little database tester. Right? It's also going to load our brand new app.js. It's in assignments and it's under app.js. Okay, there it is. So this one is loading app.js right here. Okay, all right. I'm going to restart the server, and notice that it says here hello from the server-side application. So it is running our little app.js. It just executed it. All right. So what do we want to do here? What we want to do is, as I said earlier, we want to start migrating the data that is currently running on the client. We want to navigate it, move that over to the server side. So let's do that. Let's move this array. I'm going to copy it, right? And I'm just going to paste it in here. There it is, right? So I moved it to the server. So how can the client get a hold of this data? So one technique that we're going to be using is a very common technique that became very, very popular at the beginning of the century. We thought it was going to solve every problem that there was. We overestimated what we could do with it, and then there was a big bubble, and the whole market fell in the early beginnings of the century. We got a little bit too self-confidence, and the technology was referred to back then as web services, right? It was the rage back then, and then even though it was an idea that had been around for quite a while, Corba had been using this idea for quite a while, but It was the first time that a lot of companies were coming together, agreeing on several different infrastructures and different standards. Everybody agreed on XML. Everybody agreed on having just HTTP as being a ubiquitous way of transferring data amongst machines. Everybody agreed on these basic principles, and then everybody said, "Oh well, if we could build web services around these very simple technologies, we could solve everything." And the idea was, back then, the sales pitch was that, hey, you have all these disparate systems, right? Some of them are running SQL, some of them are running Oracle, some are running different databases. Some of them are running J2EE, some are running .NET, some are running. You have all this disparate infrastructure, and nobody's talking to one another, right? And you have these like little islands, these pockets of technologies, and all throughout your enterprise, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could have all these pocket of treasures, these little treasures, participate and collaborate and have one single way to interact and collaborate, and it'd be very, very valuable. We could automate so many things. People wouldn't have to read their monitors and be on the phone and talk to one another. We could just automate all these transfers of data, right? You could have Ford. We can automate the whole production line of Ford, where Ford can talk automatically with the bank and ask for a loan, so that they can, and then funds get transferred automatically, and then to buy, right, in their supply chain automatically, right, transferring all XML, automate the whole thing, so that if inventory goes down, it can automatically reorder and automatically query and interact with government agencies to ask for permission to import and export stuff, and just automate the entire thing, right? And it sounded great, great. And the problem was that all these different agencies had completely different infrastructures that didn't talk to one another, right? The only way was to have a human being talk to you on the phone, right? And have very costly ways of converting data between all these different disparate systems, right? And said, we're all going to solve that with web services, XML, and so there was a race with different vendors, IBM, Oracle, BEA, and Sun Microsystems before it was purchased. They were all competing on how easily it was that their servers, you could build a web service. You press a button, and boom, you had a web service. Yes, and this was great. A lot of new things were invented, but the integration between the systems was much more complex than we thought it was, and we were able to fulfill on the promise. A lot of promises went unfulfilled. Nevertheless, we learned a lot from back then. Web services are still going strong. We're coming back to a much better understanding of how to use them properly, and so we're going to be using web services. Web services is just an umbrella term for exposing data that already exists and making it easy for others, right, to be able to interact with you and be able to retrieve data, right? You're providing some kind of standard way for me to share data with you in a format that is agreeable to everybody. Yes, right? It used to be that the data format that everybody agreed on was XML, right? And still is. XML is really very strong today. But with the advent of web technology and people, moving more and more of their operations to the web, more and more storing things on the web, a lot of applications moving to the web, the data format that is becoming more prevalent today is JSON, right? Just because a lot of this data eventually needs to be rendered on a browser. Yes, and on a browser you have just JavaScript running on that, right? And they want to consume data in the format that best suits JavaScript, which is JSON. Yes. So there's a lot of movement towards having web services share the data using JSON, okay, as the data format for transferring data back and forth. Yes, right. And look at this. We have JSON right here. We have an array of JSON objects, and we want to make it available to the rest of the world. Yes. There are also many different infrastructures that of how is it that you are going to ask for this data? How am I going to ask for this data from anywhere in the world? So we're going to be using an API that it's very popular in Node.js that makes it very, very easy to make this data available to the rest of the world. Okay, right now, you should have been exploring all these lots of APIs out there that allow you to retrieve, movie information or government information, medical information that is freely available on the web. Okay, there's lots and lots of databases out there that you can just query and then just retrieve data. We're going to be implementing something like that, right? We're going to be exposing all this very important data of users and websites and pages. If anybody wants to access their data, it's going to be freely available. Who wants to use it? So let's expose this. Let's expose first this list of users. All right? Let's do that next.